Okay, today we're going to be looking at Mesopotamian and Egyptian myths. Last week I had you guys make a prediction about which myth or how their myths might be different from each other. So keep that in mind because we talked about myths and the flooding in Mesopotamia. We did that geography lesson, and also the flooding in Egypt. So hopefully it is up now. I think we're up and running. Okay, so Mesopotamian and Egyptian flood myths. That's what we're looking at. Okay, the before time. This is fascinating because most cultures have this. It's called antediluvian. Anti, A-N-T-E, means before, and diluvian comes from the word deluge, which means flood. And so there is antediluvian times in most cultures. Many cultures have a flood story. I believe the Native Americans have an old woman that loaded up all the animals in a canoe and saved them. A lot of them are very similar, where somebody saves the animals and then repopulates the earth. Okay. In both Egypt and Mesopotamia, they have a before time where the gods communed with the people. Okay. Now, the gods, it's fascinating to look at that or to think about it, but it's after the floods in most cultures where the gods separate themselves from the people. Okay. Now, at some point, too, the gods decided to destroy people. There was something that people did, and the gods were going, okay, we're going to wipe them out. Now, in Mesopotamia, I couldn't find my source on this, so I didn't put it on here. But I believe Ea, that god, he dropped blood on the people because initially, when the Mesopotamian gods made people, they made them out of clay. And they were just like little robots. And these little robots would go around and do all the work for the gods. And then Ea sprinkled blood on them, and they became alive. They became sentient. They knew what was going on. And so I couldn't find that story when I was looking for it this week, but that's how the creation of people happened with Mesopotamia. Okay, and it is very similar to the Christian, Judeo, and Islamic tradition where God made people out of mud and then breathed life into their bodies. Now, the gods in Mesopotamia decided to kill the people. I think the people are making too much noise, and the gods wanted rest. Okay, and so they went, okay, let's kill them. But then they had another council, and the gods went, well, okay, maybe we can save somebody. And so Ea went to Utanapishtim. Utanapishtim is similar to, if you know Noah's Ark story, he is the Noah of the Mesopotamian culture. And he appears in a story called Gilgamesh, and we'll look at Gilgamesh later on this week. But Ea told Utanapishtim to build a boat, gave him designs for the boat, and it was a big round boat. I think it was about an acre in size, so about a football field in size. And I don't know if it had any below decks or not, but it was just a big round boat. And Utanapishtim went to the people and said, hey, the gods are going to destroy us, but the people didn't listen to him. And so Utanapishtim and his wife were the only people that were saved. Now, when the rains came, they lasted for 7 days. Okay, and it just poured and poured and poured. And the storms spun off all these whirlwinds. It got very nasty. Now, even the gods were afraid of the flood and the storms because it took off on them. And they weren't sure that even they would survive. Now, 12 days after, so it rained for 7 days. And then for 12 days after the rain, Utanapishtim was on his boat and just floating out there. And he ran aground on this hill. And the very first thing he did is he released a dove to see if the dove would land somewhere. The dove didn't land anywhere, and so it came back to the boat. Then he released a sparrow, and that sparrow did the same thing. Flew around and came back. And then he released a raven, and the raven took off and landed on a twig somewhere and didn't come back. And so a few days later, Utanapishtim opened the window up and got outside, and he started to create an offering for the gods. Now, the gods, one of the things that they didn't see as a consequence of the flood was there wouldn't be people around to offer them sacrifices. And so they were hungry. And so they smelled the meat that Utanapishtim was cooking, and they came to him. And they ate it and they loved it, because the god's job in Mesopotamia is to feed the gods and serve the gods. Now, there is a god named Bel. Now, Bel, when we look at these names, Bel is a common name um, in Mesopotamia. Okay, that el sound is the sound or the name of God. Okay, in Jewish tradition, one of the names for God is El Shaddai, and so that L sound. In fact, many of the prophets in Judaism are Daniel, Israel. Israel actually means one who struggles with God. And so you have these names that end with EL, that they put the name of God in their name. Just like with Christians, a lot of kids might be named Christian or Chris or Chrissy, okay, because they take that name. And then in Hispanic cultures, we have a lot of kids named Jesus, okay, and it's spelled just the same as Jesus. Okay, in Islamic tradition, we have a lot of kids named after the Prophet. Now, in Islamic tradition, Allah has over 100 names. And so we will see people that have the name of Allah in their name, even though it's not Allah. Um, so it's a different variation of the name. But Bel is a god that came out and he was angry and he wanted to destroy all the people. But the gods convinced him not to, because that sacrifice probably saved Utnapishtim and his wife. And so the gods gave Utnapishtim his immortality, and so he would live forever. Next Thursday, we'll see him come back up in a story. Now, let me move my camera over, because now we're going to be looking at Egypt. Okay. Now, Egypt. One day when Ra was getting old, the people wanted to rebel against him. And Ra asked the other gods how he should deal with these people, because you don't want rebellious people. And the gods advised that he kill them. Okay, just kill them all. We can do something else with these guys. And so Ra released one of the gods. What is fascinating about these god stories? In Mesopotamian gods, we have the first, I think one of the gods releases the army of the dead. So zombies. We have zombies that are 4,000 or 6,000 years old in stories. But the gods will typically turn to some of their lower gods, or gods that are their allies, to attack the people. And so he released Hathor to come down and kill the people. Now the people saw Hathor coming and they took off into the desert. Okay. Now, when you look at the geography of Egypt, you have the Nile River Valley, and that is where the floods are. Okay. And then you have these canyon walls that go up the side. Sometimes that canyon is pretty narrow, sometimes like 15, 20 miles across, but that is where all the people live in Egypt, or 99% of them. There are very few people that live in the deserts. But they took off and ran to the desert. Now, Hathor changed her image, and she came out as a lion, Sekhmet, and she started killing people. Now, Ra saw these people dying, and he thought, you know what? I'm going to save them. Some people think that Ra had this in mind all along, that he wanted to be the savior of people, so they would come back and honor him. And so he was kind of playing the people a little bit, manipulating them. Okay. And so what Ra did is he took this red stone and mixed it up with beer. Now, in Egyptian culture and also in medieval ages, beer is a common drink, even for little kids. A lot of times the water wouldn't be safe to drink, and so you would have this low alcohol content beer, and that low alcohol content would actually kill the bacteria, and so you'd have something safe to drink. But Ra took this red dust and mixed it up with beer, and he poured it all over the Nile Valley. And so Sekhmet saw this and thought, ooh, blood. And she jumped out there and started drinking up all the beer. And she got drunk and she fell asleep. Okay. Now, since that time, the Egyptians will have this celebration, a party that celebrates the flooding. Okay. If you look at Mesopotamian gods or their flood story, there isn't a celebration that celebrates the time of flooding, because the flooding is random. They don't know when it's going to happen. But in Egypt, the 20th day of Thoth, boy, I would have to look at the Egyptian calendar. I haven't looked at it for a while, but I believe they have a 360-day calendar. and they have 5 feast days. So that brings up to 365. But on the 20th day of Thoth, they have this mid-August celebration where everyone goes out and drinks beer. Okay, it's not a social thing; it is a religious celebration. Now, before you guys go, "Ooh, really cool," Catholics will often celebrate communion, and they will serve their people wine. Okay, so it's something that is incorporated into a lot of religious traditions, um, and we can talk about that later on too. But um, wine celebrating life. A lot of times, the wine or that beer that's red is supposed to represent blood. Um, but that festival that they celebrate coincides with the beginning of the Nile's annual floods. Okay. So, what you guys need to do from both Egypt and Mesopotamia. Why won't my picture move? There it goes. The time after the floods marks the time of separation. The gods have their realm, which is typically the heavens, and the people have their realm, which is the earth. Okay. Question for you, and this will be an assignment you turn in. Do you see a difference in the flood stories between Egypt and Mesopotamia? Which story is celebrated? Okay. Which flood story finishes with a sacrifice to the gods? And which culture do we more closely mirror? When I say we, in the West, we are typically Judeo, Christian, Muslim. Okay. We do have other faiths. We do have, Buddhist, Hindu, all over. We have every faith is probably represented in our school. But for the West, that Christian, Jewish, and Muslim faith, which one do those 3 religions mirror? Let's see. Answer those questions. If you have any questions for me, please shoot me an email. Take care. There are my sources if you want to look at them.